My sister Sarah and I have always been close. Growing up, we shared everything: our secrets, our dreams, even our frustrations. We were more than just siblings. We were best friends. Even as adults, we stayed connected, always supporting each other through life's ups and downs. So when we both found out we were pregnant around the same time, it felt like a special, once-in-a-lifetime experience. Sarah gave birth to her son, George, a few months ago, and I was genuinely happy for her. I knew she had always wanted to be a mom, and seeing her finally hold her baby boy was a beautiful moment. But as my own pregnancy progressed, I started noticing a change in her. It was subtle at first: small comments about parenting choices, advice I hadn't asked for, but I brushed it off as excitement. After all, we were both stepping into this new chapter of our lives. Then she started talking about baby names. It wasn't just casual conversation, though. Sarah had always had strong opinions about names, and she didn't hold back when critiquing other people's choices. I remembered a time, long before either of us were pregnant, when I mentioned how cute the name Meadow was after meeting a little girl with that name. Sarah immediately dismissed it, saying it was ridiculous and that real names should have history and meaning. Another time, when our cousin named her baby Dex, I had said I loved it, and Sarah reacted with disbelief, accusing me of lying because in her mind, no one could actually like a name like that. But that was just Sarah being Sarah. She had opinions, and I didn't always agree with them, but it never became a real issue between us. Until now. Because suddenly Sarah wasn't just voicing her opinions. She was actively trying to dictate what I should name my child. And no matter how many times I told her it wasn't up for discussion, she refused to listen. Sarah had always had a thing for vintage names. She loved names that felt traditional, classic, timeless, at least in her opinion. Names like Eleanor, Henry, or Margaret. She thought anything outside of that was too modern, too trendy, or just plain wrong. Before either of us were pregnant, her opinions had been strong but sporadic. A comment here and there about what she considered a real name, or how people these days were naming their kids the weirdest things. I never took it too seriously. I figured she was just particular about names and had strong personal preferences. But once we were both expecting, it escalated. At first, she simply suggested names. And by suggested, I mean she kept listing off names she loved, not bothering to ask if I was even looking for suggestions. Names like Ethel, Evelyn, Theodore, and Arthur. She acted like she was just being helpful, but I hadn't asked for help. I made it clear early on that my husband and I would be deciding on the name ourselves and that I wasn't looking for input. She completely ignored that. Instead, she acted like naming my child was a group project, one where she had just as much say as I did. Then came the Bridgerton obsession. Sarah loved the show. She'd been talking about it nonstop ever since she got into it, and apparently it even influenced her choice of George for her son. That was fine. She could name her child whatever she wanted. But then she decided that if I had a girl, she had to be named Charlotte. That way, we'd have a George and a Charlotte, just like in the show. At first, I thought she was joking. It was such a ridiculous idea that I just laughed it off. But the way she kept bringing it up, over and over again, made me realize she wasn't joking at all. The moment Sarah settled on George for her son's name, she became fixated on the idea of me naming my baby Charlotte. She talked about it like it was fate, like we had this incredible opportunity to have perfectly matched, aesthetically pleasing sibling cousins. "You have to name her Charlotte," she gushed one day. "Can you imagine how adorable it would be? George and Charlotte, just like Bridgerton. It's such a classy, timeless pair. It would be perfect." I reminded her, again, that I wasn't discussing baby names with anyone, that my husband and I would make the decision ourselves when the time was right. But she just waved me off like I hadn't spoken at all. "You will love it once you think about it," she insisted. "It just makes sense. Plus, Charlotte is such a beautiful, strong name. So much history. So much elegance. Trust me, you'll thank me later." I could feel my patience wearing thin. It wasn't just a casual suggestion anymore. She was pushing it, hard. It was like she had already decided for me, and I was just supposed to accept it. Every conversation started to loop back to the same topic. She'd bring it up at family dinners, during phone calls, even in texts. If I even hinted at changing the subject, she'd find a way to steer it right back. It didn't matter that I kept shutting her down, she refused to let it go. I was frustrated, but I tried to be understanding. Maybe she was just excited. Maybe this was just her way of feeling connected to our shared experience of motherhood. But deep down, I knew this was different. She wasn't just being excited, she was being insistent. And no matter how many times I told her to drop it, she refused to listen. I thought that if I ignored Sarah's suggestions long enough, she'd eventually get the hint and move on. I was wrong. Every time we spoke, she found a way to bring up baby names. If I tried to change the subject, she'd circle back to it like it was the most important conversation in the world. One day, after she had gone on yet another rant about how amazing the name Charlotte was, I finally cut her off. "Sarah, I'm not talking about baby names with anyone. My husband and I will decide when the time is right. Please stop bringing it up." She blinked, clearly surprised by my tone. But instead of backing off, she just scoffed. "Why are you being so weird about this? I'm just trying to help. You'll regret not choosing a timeless name." I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. "I appreciate your excitement, but this isn't up for debate. It's my baby, my decision. Can we please drop this?" She didn't argue outright, but I could tell she wasn't letting it go. The next time I saw her, she casually mentioned how nice it would be if cousins had names that complemented each other. When I ignored her, she escalated. "If it's a boy, you have to consider Edmund," she said, completely ignoring the fact that I had already shut her down. "It's a Bridgerton name, too, and it would sound great with Charlotte if you have more kids in the future." I clenched my jaw. "Sarah, stop." She rolled her eyes, acting like I was the one being unreasonable. "Fine, whatever. But you're missing out on a beautiful opportunity." I could feel the frustration bubbling up. It wasn't just about the names anymore. It was the fact that she wasn't listening, that she refused to respect my boundaries, and no matter how many times I told her to stop, she just wouldn't. At this point, Sarah's suggestions had turned into full-blown pressure. It was no longer just a casual opinion. She was treating it like some kind of mission. Every conversation had the same pattern. I'd try to talk about something else, and she'd find a way to bring it back to baby names. "If you don't like Charlotte, at least pick something classic," she said one day while we were out for lunch. "You don't want your child to have one of those weird modern names. Trust me." I sighed, setting my fork down. "Sarah, I told you, I'm not talking about this. Why do you keep pushing?" She frowned, looking genuinely confused. "Because I care. I don't want you to make a mistake you'll regret later. Names matter." "I know names matter. That's why my husband and I are deciding this together, in private." She let out an exaggerated sigh, clearly frustrated. "I just don't get why you're being so secretive. It's not that big of a deal." But it was a big deal, to me. Every time she ignored my boundaries, it made me feel like my decisions didn't matter. Like she thought she had more of a say over my child than I did. The worst part was that she acted like she was doing me a favor. She wasn't being malicious, at least I didn't think so. But that almost made it worse. She truly believed she was helping, which meant she wasn't going to stop. I started avoiding baby-related conversations altogether. If she texted me about names, I wouldn't respond. If she brought it up in person, I'd change the subject. But no matter what I did, she always found a way to bring it up again. It didn't matter how clear I was, she would not let this go. As much as Sarah kept pushing, my husband and I had already narrowed it down to 2 names. And while we were still deciding, one name was standing out more than the other. Lyra. It felt right. It was beautiful, unique, but not too out there. Most importantly, it was our choice, made without outside interference. But I knew one thing for sure. If Sarah found out, she would hate it. She had already made her stance on modern names painfully clear. And Lyra? It wasn't even remotely in the same category as Charlotte or Evelyn. If I told her now, she would go into full meltdown mode, doubling down on her campaign for a proper name. So, I made a decision. I wasn't telling her. Not before the baby was born, not after. Not until it was set in stone, written on the birth certificate, completely final. It was exhausting, having to be so careful about my own pregnancy just to avoid a fight. But at this point, I didn't trust her to respect my choice. I wasn't going to give her the opportunity to criticize, guilt trip, or wear me down. One afternoon, she called me, her voice full of excitement. Okay, so I was thinking, if you're still unsure, I found a list of perfect names for you, all timeless, all elegant. You'll love them. I closed my eyes and exhaled. Sarah, stop. Stop what? I'm just trying to help. No, I cut her off. You're not helping. I told you we're not talking about this. There was a long silence before she sighed dramatically. I just don't get why you're being so difficult about this. I clenched my jaw. I was done explaining myself, done trying to get her to listen. If she wouldn't respect my boundaries on her own, then I'd have to make her. Sarah's persistence had reached a breaking point. No matter how many times I told her to stop, she ignored me. No matter how many conversations I shut down, she found a way to bring the topic back. I had changed the subject, walked away, even hung up on her. Nothing worked. Then, at a family gathering, she did it again, in front of everyone. So, she said casually, but with that knowing smile, have you finally come to your senses and decided on Charlotte? I felt my stomach tighten. I had barely sat down, and she was already at it. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my response. I could ignore her, like I had been doing for weeks. I could brush it off, laugh awkwardly, try to move on. But I was done playing that game. I set my plate down and met her gaze. Sarah, I need you to stop. I don't want to repeat myself anymore. If you won't shut up about what you want me to name my child, then we need some time apart. The room went dead silent. Sarah blinked, clearly not expecting me to snap. Then she let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You're joking. I'm not, I said flatly. I mean it. If you bring this up again, I won't answer your calls. I won't go anywhere you are. I need you to respect that this is not your decision to make. Her smile faded. Wow, you're really willing to stop talking to me over a baby name? I clenched my jaw. It's not about the name. It's about the way you keep pushing, ignoring me, acting like you get a say in something that isn't yours to decide. She scoffed, shaking her head. You're being so dramatic. But for the first time, I didn't care if she thought that. I wasn't asking anymore. I was setting a boundary. And if she couldn't accept that, then maybe some distance was exactly what we needed. Sarah stared at me like I had just insulted her. For a moment, I thought she might actually take what I said seriously. But then, she scoffed, crossing her arms. You're really overreacting, she said, her tone dripping with disbelief. This is so petty. I exhaled sharply, trying to keep my voice steady. It's not petty to want my choices to be respected. I didn't tell you what to name George. I expect the same courtesy. She rolled her eyes. That's completely different. George is a classic name. No one would argue with it. But you're being all secretive and probably picking something ridiculous just to prove a point. I clenched my fists under the table. That's not what this is about, and you know it. But she wasn't listening. Seriously, I'm your sister. This shouldn't be a big deal. Why are you acting like I'm trying to control you? I let out a short laugh, one without humor. Because that's exactly what you're doing. Sarah shook her head, pushing her chair back. Unbelievable. You're acting like a kid instead of an adult. I felt the heat rise in my face. but I refused to let her drag me into another argument. I had said what I needed to say. If she refused to hear it, that was her problem, not mine. She stood up, grabbing her bag. "You'll regret this, you know. I'm just trying to help. One day you'll see I was right." And with that, she walked away, leaving behind a tense, awkward silence. I knew this wasn't over. But for the first time in months, I felt like I had finally taken back some control. After that confrontation, Sarah and I barely spoke. She was clearly furious with me, and honestly, I was fine with the silence. For the first time in months, I wasn't being hounded about baby names every time we talked. But then she started getting the rest of the family involved. It started with our mom, who called me a few days later. "Honey, I know you and Sarah had a little disagreement, but do you really think it's worth cutting her off over this?" I sighed, already feeling the exhaustion creeping in. "Mom, it's not about this. It's about the fact that she won't respect my choices. I've told her over and over to stop, and she just won't listen." "She's just excited," Mom insisted. "You know how she is. She loves classic names, and she thought it would be special for the cousins to have matching names. Is that really so terrible?" I pinched the bridge of my nose. "No, Mom, but ignoring me is terrible. She's made it clear she doesn't care about what I want, only about what she wants." Mom sighed. "I just don't want this to ruin your relationship." "It's not me ruining it," I said firmly. "It's her. And unless she apologizes and actually respects my boundaries, I don't want to talk about this anymore." But Sarah wasn't done. A few days later, I got a message from our cousin, Emma. "Hey, I heard about the whole baby name thing. I think Sarah was just trying to bond with you. Maybe you should just tell her the name so she can get over it." I stared at my phone, my frustration reaching a boiling point. Now she was getting other people to pressure me? Was she really that unwilling to just accept my decision? I knew I had made the right choice by putting distance between us. But now, I wasn't sure if things would ever go back to the way they were. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between Sarah and me hadn't eased. She still wasn't speaking to me directly, but I kept hearing from family members about how I was being unfair and overreacting. Apparently, she had painted me as the unreasonable one, the dramatic younger sister who was blowing things out of proportion. At first, I was angry. Then I started questioning myself. Had I been too harsh? Should I have just humored her? Let her ramble about names without pushing back so hard? It wasn't like she had bad intentions. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was just obsessed. But every time I considered giving in, I remembered the frustration I had felt for months. The constant pressure. The way she refused to respect a simple boundary. The fact that even now, instead of reflecting on her actions, she was rallying others to her side. I wasn't the one making this a bigger deal. She was. Still, part of me felt guilty. Sarah and I had always been close, and now there was this huge wedge between us. I wondered if she would ever admit she had taken things too far, or if she would always see me as the bad guy for standing my ground. Now, as I get closer to giving birth, I can't help but wonder, was I wrong? Should I have handled this differently? Or was I right to finally set a boundary, even if it meant risking my relationship with my sister? AITA?